guys in the dark.
About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the United States. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, had gone to bed. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend my time thinking. I spent 4 years like this, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were pretty polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday. It was somewhere between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. I was walking near a police-patrolled park, quite a ways away from my apartment. It happened to be a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as at its most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was definitely a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dancing, or walking, headed straight for me. Decided he was probably drunk. I stepped as close as I could to the road, just so I can give him the majority of the sidewalk so he could pass me by. The closer that he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and very wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide, cartoonish kind of smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer to me. I had taken my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing, and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking once again, but I kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move at all. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and the sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to see where he had been standing, to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I had noticed him again. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure, due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain that he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved pretty fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring directly at him, and then he started moving towards me once again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on somebody, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point that I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man had crept towards me, and then he stopped once again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking directly at the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that had come to my mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in a very angry, commanding tone. What had come out was a whimper. "What the fuck?" Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they certainly can hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then after what felt like forever, he had turned around, very slowly, and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back on him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I had realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I ran off the side of the road and back onto better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. This incident had happened to me about 10 years ago. I live in Australia. I was driving home from work one night around 9 p.m., midweek, so the roads were pretty quiet. As I was driving downhill, I heard a sound that was like a jet engine roaring behind me. The next thing I know, a car goes flying right past me, going twice the speed limit. It looked like a fairly old, crappy car. The car started to get the speed wobbles, and then one of the tires came flying off and rolled at speeds downhill while the car spun out and crashed. I stopped my car to make sure whoever inside was okay. A guy had gotten out of the car, looked over at me, and started moving extremely quickly towards me. I don't know why, but I hit my internal locks on the car, which was unfortunate, because no more than 2 seconds later, this guy started grabbing at the driver's side door, smashing on my windshield with his fist trying to get in. I'll never forget the crazy look that he had in his eyes. I put my foot down on the accelerator and drove off back home. I had decided to go swap cars once I had gotten home, and drove back to see what was going on. I saw 2 fire trucks and 4 police close to where the incident had happened. When I got back to the crash site, the guy was no longer there, so I decided that I should head home. The next day at work, I was online. I was bored reading the news when I saw an article that had shocked me. The article was about a guy who had been in a police chase for 1 hour. The police had stopped chasing him because it was becoming too dangerous for them. It turns out that the guy was high on meth, had stolen a car an hour drive away, had been in a hot pursuit since. After crashing the car, the guy apparently had crossed to the other side of the road and hailed the first car that appeared, which was a taxi. He got into the taxi and then stole it. In the process, he pushed the driver out of the driver's side door. The driver got stuck and dragged at speeds. The driver died from the incident. I called the police and had a detective assigned to me. The fingerprints checked my car and got a treatment. I had to testify in the Supreme Court as a key witness in a murder trial. The guy had gotten 30 years. They told me that my testimony was one of the main factors in convicting him. This is from the days when I used to live back home. I used to live in Pakistan, but I moved to the UK. We used to live very close to a CID. It was a police investigation department. It was basically Pakistan FBI. Building which we were unaware of, and always thought that it was just an ordinary government building, till on the 11th of November 2010. That day, I was coming home around evening time from work. I thought that I better hit the gym, because they had a sauna, and after being tired all day from work, that sounded like a really good idea, which was hardly a 0.3 miles away, so I decided to walk to the gym. I quickly changed and would leave for the gym, and then I start walking towards the gym. This is about the time that I've almost walked like 10 minutes, and I'm about maybe 1/10 of a mile away, roughly. All of a sudden, there's a nano sound. I feel the ground is shaking, and the next thing I hear is the loudest bang that I've ever heard, followed by a pressure kick into my chest. Now to let you guys know, both my ears started bleeding because the bang was so loud. And for the reference, the kick in my chest was as bad as Big Show wearing military boots and kicking you in the chest straight with full force. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground, covering my ears because they are in agony, and covered in dirt trying to figure out what has just happened. As I'm trying to figure out, I can see all the car's alarms have gone off. Anything made up of glass has shattered in roughly about 1 to 2 miles area. I'm still looking to figure out what has happened, and I start smelling gunpowder, and as if someone is making a barbecue and being burnt. I will always remember that smell, which was something unsettling. Next thing, rocks and dust particles start landing on me, and the surrounding areas, which had about 1 to 1.5 inches along of pieces of human skin and flesh. I'm not believing that I had another human skin piece stuck to my arm. I brush up my clothing and my arms, getting up and covering my ear, recovering from that pressure kick. As I move closer to a spot in the street where I'm hearing loads of people screaming and crying, I see a few 3 to 5 foot cracks between some walls of the building which have been destroyed by the shock wave of the bang. I see the gap between a wall and move into the area where I see these scenes straight from a Hollywood movie, where people are crying, cars are on fire, and dead bodies are on the ground. By this time, I'm thinking that it is a bomb blast, and that is what happened. As I move closer, I see a 10-foot and a 30-foot wide crater, which has been filled with the water and the building, which was the CID building that is no longer there. There are hundreds of people lying on the ground, crying for some help, as some of them don't even have legs or limbs, and some don't even have their complete bottoms. I'm still in the state of shock, looking around. I see a woman crying and hitting herself because she had her husband dead, whose legs and torso was missing. I see that later. A couple of people without legs, and everything else. Not even hands. One thing which haunted me for sure was an 18 to 20-year-old guy who was dead and lying on the floor towards his chest on the floor, with his neck turned right towards me. I can remember him looking straight into my eyes. His feet were flipped the other way. After the police had arrived, and media arrived, I came back home after it got crowded. I would come home after dusk every single day. I would see that 18 to 20-year-old boy standing and staring into my eyes. I would wake up screaming throughout the night and see the guy standing at the doorway, just staring directly at me. For 2 or 3 weeks, I would just see this guy regularly during midnight, standing directly in my hallway, staring through my soul. I still remember that guy's face, and the shockwave, and the sound of the blast. According to BBC, it said that eyewitnesses had said that the blast left a crater about 12 meters wide in front of the gutted building in Pakistan's financial and commercial capital. This had happened to a friend of mine a few years ago, when he and his wife were hiking in the Gold Coast hinterland of Queensland, Australia. After a good day's hike, they had stopped at the rest stop to use the bathroom before heading back to their car. The bathrooms at the rest stop were a toilet, basically compost toilets, so the block of the toilets were positioned at the top of a large tank. The waste goes in the tank, and then he breaks down naturally. In the winter months, often shoots a blast of cold air up the bum of anyone using them. My friend's wife had went into the ladies' room while he waited outside, but she had not been in there very long when he heard her scream and then rushed out of the toilet. It's Australia, so there's many things for running out of a bush toilet screaming, like snakes, spiders, drop bears. But this one takes the cake. There happens to be a man in the toilet. My friend was confused. His wife explained to him that she had gone to the loo, and after she'd finished, she looked into the tank. Come on, you know morbid curiosity would get the better of you too. And there, submerged in liquid poop, she saw a bald man staring directly at her. He didn't believe her, but she was adamant that he go look. So he went into the ladies' room, and with the flashlight with his iPhone, he illuminated the pool to get a better look. He couldn't see anything, but she was certain that there was someone hiding in the tank, watching people use the toilet. As they were leaving, and still arguing about it, when they were approached by a man. "Excuse me, but did you see something weird in the toilet?" My friend's wife had answered yes. The man replied, "Was it a man?" He and his girlfriend had been hiking the weekend before, and his girlfriend had seen the same thing. They all ran back up to the toilets for the second look. When they reached the door, they heard a sound from behind the toilet block. My friend and their new acquaintance went around the back to the toilet block to check it out, while his wife had looked in the tank from the bowl. At the back of the tank, the top hatch had been opened. The bolt and chain had been removed, and a telltale brown smudge seemed to suggest someone had slid down the back of the tank and taken off into the bush. My friend and I used to play in a creek as a kid. It had a tunnel that went under a road. We used to go in the tunnel to make noises, and then hear the echo. Little kid stuff like that. Also, just a preface. The part of the creek that we had played in was maybe 25 to 50 yards away from a relatively popular park. So one day we had went into the tunnel, and there's 2 grown men in there. Being the innocent children that we were, we thought that they were just playing, or trying to catch some minnows. Then they started up a conversation. I don't really remember what it was about, but they got us to follow them quite a ways away from the park and any houses. Now, at the very end of the creek, there was a deep pocket with some fish right before it, drained out to some unknown location. Anyway, some people had fished down there. So they got us back to this pool. All alone, when out of nowhere a dad and his son happened to come out of the woods onto the sandbed with fishing poles. The men looked very frightened and said that we were their kids. My friend and I said something along the lines of, "We aren't your kids." Then the dad had brought us back to the park, asked my friend, who happened to be older than me, what his mom's number is, and told us to go play on the playground with his son. Next thing I know, both of our mothers show up. His was absolutely livid with us, and mine was just happy to see us. Then the cops happened to show up, asked us to describe the men, said that they would check it out, and that we were instructed never to go back there ever again. Being the dumb kids that we were, we went right back as soon as we could. Thankfully, though, we never saw those two men ever again.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.